In this lesson, we're going to take a look at an ambient occlusion method that utilizes final gather rays. Alright, so if you open up the start file and hit render, you'll notice that we have just a very simple light setup to start with. We have just a standard point light that's casting shadows and is just illuminating certain areas of this object. Really, that's all that we have set up. Now let's take a look at a final gather method, or rather a ambient occlusion method that utilizes final gather. So just like with the normal ambient occlusion node, this is something that can be plugged into a standard Maya shader. In our case, we'll use the surface shader, just like what we did with the normal ambient occlusion. Now the final gather occlusion is found inside the metal ray nodes, and this is actually, rather than being found in textures like a lot of the other ambient occlusion methods, the final gather based occlusion is actually found inside the metal ray lights tab. If you scroll down, you should see MIB final gather occlusion. Alright, so to connect this up, let's take our surface shader, middle click our ambient occlusion shader, drag it into the out color. And if you take a look at the attributes for this final gather based occlusion, really we only have one attribute, which is the color that this object will be whenever the final gather is turned off. Alright, so let's go ahead and assign our material to this piece of geometry. So select them all, assign material to selection, and you can see that we just get back white. And really this is coming from the attribute that is set to the color whenever the final gather is turned off. So we actually will not see any kind of occlusion effect happening until we enable final gather. So go into the render settings. In Maya 2009 and above, this is found under indirect lighting. Take a look under final gathering, and now enable final gather. And now, rather than using the ambient occlusion rays, this will now utilize the final gather rays as a method of detecting and calculating this occlusion. And you can see this is now the effect that we get. So you'll notice that for initial purposes, this is actually calculating a little bit faster than standard ambient occlusion. So let's take a look at what we can actually do to improve the quality of our final gather occlusion result. So again, because there are no actual attributes found in the shader itself, the result of this final gather based occlusion is going to be controlled entirely through these final gather attributes. So if we wanted to now start to introduce a little bit more detail into this, we'll have to increase the number of final gather rays, which is the accuracy. And you'll notice that that starts to pull in just a little bit more detail now. Now, one of the things that final gather will do by default is it starts to actually blur out the result, and this is just a way of eliminating noise and some of this high frequency artifacting that you can start to get with final gather. Now, if we want to try to minimize that blurring effect and try to introduce a little bit more sharpness into our occlusion result, we can start to decrease this point interpolation, which is really just controlling the blurriness of the final gather result. If I save my comparison image, you can start to see how that will now begin sharpening some of this detail up. However, you will start to now introduce, as a result of this, now that we are not actually blurring this final gather result, is you'll start to see a little bit of high frequency noise, especially whenever this object moves. So let's actually come in and try to lower the actual distance of our occlusion. Now again, this is all going to be controlled entirely through the final gather settings. So let's take a look inside the final gather quality, and to start to choke back this occlusion result, we can start to lower the fall off start and the fall off stop. This is really controlling the distance that our final gather rays are able to travel before they return their result. So for the start, let's lower this something to like 0.01, and for the stop, we'll try to keep this at a fairly low value just so we can really see the result. So now our final gather rays shouldn't travel any more than 0.1 units before they return their result. And you can see that's exactly what we get. So now if we wanted to allow this to spread out a little bit more, we could just begin slowly increasing this fall off stop until we find a result that will work for us. And there we go. Now you will start to notice that while we begin increasing the final gather accuracy, start to lower the amount of fuzziness on our final gather result, and start to really kind of choke back the overall spread of our final gather rays, that really the speed of our renders is not that much faster than if we were using just traditional ambient occlusion. Now here's where the real drawback to using this final gather based occlusion comes in, is that since we are using final gather rays, is that we're still prone to the same kind of high frequency noise flickering that we will oftentimes get whenever using final gather. So to illustrate this, let me just start with a single frame render. Alright, so here's the image. Now I'll save this for comparison. And now I'll take my camera and just move it very slightly. Alright, now this will force the final gather rays to recalculate. Okay, and now if I take a look at the before and after frames, you'll notice that the camera has shifted very slightly. And we can really start to see in areas like this lower part of the joint where we can actually see a little bit of flickering in the final gather rays from frame to frame. Now this is a problem that we often run into whenever using final gather, and since we are using final gather now to calculate this occlusion, we're now really kind of subject to those same kinds of errors. So this is something, however, that the normal ambient occlusion doesn't necessarily have a problem with. So there are some situations where final gather based occlusion can be very useful as far as just giving you a very quick previewed result of your ambient occlusion. However, because it is prone to these types of high frequency noise jittering effects, typically you will probably want to stick with the standard ambient occlusion. So that's a look at final gather based occlusion in Maya.